An historic night for the Democratic Party. At the age of just 34, Zohran Mamdani becomes New York's first Muslim mayor, the youngest mayor in a generation. They also won, the Democrats, those key governor races in Virginia and New Jersey, and they did it with very different candidates. So what does it mean for the party? What does it mean for Donald Trump? What does it mean for the Republicans? An awful lot to unpack. Welcome to Americast.
Americast from BBC News.
Hello, it's Justin in the worldwide headquarters of Americast in London, England.
Hello, it is Sarah here in Brooklyn in New York City.
Hello, it's Mariana, Misinformation, also in Brooklyn in New York City. I'm here for a different documentary I'm doing, but happen to be in the same place as Sarah at kind of the right time.
Okay, and both of you exactly in the right place. And Brooklyn, I think in many respects, not only in New York City, but the right part of New York City to be in. And we'll get to that in just a second. I should say it's what is it? Just coming at 4 o'clock in the morning here in London, in the gloom and loneliness of our studio here. But it's been quite a night, and we should start, I suppose, with the New York City win, but also, Mariana, a kind of sense of the way in which so many people in New York, although they expected this to happen, will still be beside themselves with delight.
Yeah, I mean, I only flew in not very many hours ago now, and we went to go and grab a bite to eat, and I realised that the result had come in because there were just cheers popping up. We were like, what's going on over there? And there was a watch party where we saw some people outside and they were all cheering. And then the entire walk back to our hotel, we could hear different groups of people who were cheering at this news that the exit poll had come out at that time and that Mamdani was very much looking set to be mayor. Sarah, I don't know what you found in terms of your experience of actually being at a watch party.
Yeah, no, there's a level of enthusiasm and excitement in New York tonight that I haven't seen for a very long time, to be perfectly honest, certainly not on the Democrat side, where there were queues around the block of people trying to get into unofficial watch party events, just numbers of people coming out, wanting to be on the streets, wanting to be together to witness what is a historic moment in New York City. And young people who aren't normally involved in politics, there's a real kind of sense of a groundswell of support for Mamdani that goes beyond the normal reach of Democrat politics. And it's a level of excitement that it's taken, it's been a very long time, I think, since any particular candidate has really managed to galvanise people in the way that Mamdani's rather unusual campaign has managed to do.
Yeah, and I mean, very different people and very different policies and all the rest of it. But you think back to Barack Obama, actually, and the kind of high spot of the enthusiasm for him and the way in which young people were out in particular supporting him. And I'm not suggesting at all that there is a similarity between them. Times have changed and the candidates are very different. But it really does strike me that this, for the Democrats, I mean, is this going too far to say there are lessons here? If you put the policies to one side, and we maybe ought to talk about those in just a second, but if you put the policies to one side, when it comes to the enthusiasm and when it comes to the abilities of the candidate, there is a big lesson here.
Yeah, there's a huge lesson here. And unfortunately, it's not one that you can easily replicate in every other race that the Democrats have got to stand a candidate, because the difference is Mamdani is just a really, really good candidate. He is charismatic. He's eloquent. He's natural and authentic. He ran a really good campaign on social media, but he was also out on the streets in real life talking to voters. He started off this campaign by specifically going and talking to people in New York who had voted for Donald Trump a year ago and asking them what it is that they wanted, what they needed to make their life better in the city, and adjusting his policies around that. He's got a reach and a natural way of talking to people that you just don't find in everyday political candidates, even in the candidates who've gone on to have really, big wins in Virginia and New Jersey, more traditional candidates. They're not like Mamdani in that he feels like one of these once in a generation, quite special politicians whom people really, really can latch onto and feel as though they know and feel close to in a way that they often don't when they're listening to politicians give speeches. And as you say, Justin, if you put the politics of it aside, yeah, there is something of the Barack Obama about him, but you can't replicate that easily, can you? It's not that often that we see somebody who really creates this level of excitement among voters.
And uses social media, Mariana, in a way that,
Yeah,
that older
exactly.
ones just can't. I mean, you think of the congressional leadership of the Democratic Party and their use of social media, which is, plodding, to put it kindly. This guy really has got it.
Yeah, and I think, we've chatted about it quite a lot, how the Democrats have really struggled with how to win, if that's the right verb, social media, and that Donald Trump has been miles and miles ahead in terms of his ability to really build an online persona, to create loads of content, to create an online movement that has lots of energy and excitement about it in the form of MAGA. And actually, although this is obviously on a much smaller scale and it's just in New York and all of the caveats that we've chatted about before, what Mamdani has done in terms of building and evolving this blueprint of how you do politics in the social media age, he seems authentic. His content is really relatable. It talks about issues that people care about, whether that's to do with rent, the economy, whatever that might be, social issues, the war in Gaza. He will choose something and he will just create a load of content around it that's quite relatable. He also then, will like turn up on nights out or do things that kind of seem normal, quote unquote, and is quite happy to take part in those sorts of stunts, but in a way that doesn't feel as politician or performative. And I think that if you were the Democrats, regardless of whether you think that, he is the kind of person that will progress within the party or not, you would look at what he's done in terms of really building that social media profile and creating that kind of content and think, right, this is at least a step for us in the right direction.
I mean, could we say, though, Sarah, before we get carried away, when you look at the opposition that he had, and I'm thinking particularly of Cuomo, we should say a bit about him, because he was running, wasn't he, as an independent, but running in a pretty somnolent way. And he was the main opposition because the Republican wasn't really anywhere. I mean, can you also say, well, hang on a second, this was one good candidate amid a field of frankly, complete duds?
To a certain extent, yes. And, we also have to say the politics of New York is very different from the politics of the rest of America. And what works here in a solidly Democrat, solidly blue city wouldn't necessarily work in every swing state across America. But the other thing that's been fascinating about this race, exactly as you point out, Justin, is it was really Democrat on Democrat. I mean, we were more looking at the established, more right-wing part of the Democratic Party versus this insurgent young left-winger with the Republican Curtis Sliwa barely in the race. Mamdani came through the primary process. He beat Andrew Cuomo, who was a very popular Democrat governor of New York some time ago, who ended up leaving office after allegations of sexual harassment. He tried to win the Democratic nomination. He failed. He was badly beaten by Mamdani, and he decided to run as an independent instead. And they were far and away the leading candidates. So this was an argument essentially among Democrats that we were looking at here. And the event I went to this evening was actually run by the Democratic Socialists of America, of which Mamdani is a member. He was the official Democrat candidate, but he's never shied away from calling himself a Democratic Socialist. And as well as everybody being ecstatically excited there, everyone I spoke to had criticisms of other Democrats. They weren't talking about Donald Trump. They weren't talking about Republicans. What they were saying to me was, look, Mamdani's a new kind of politician who's offering something that traditional establishment Democrats aren't. He's got fresh ideas instead of just criticising Donald Trump. And every time Andrew Cuomo appeared on the television screens around this event, people were booing and hissing, and there were chants of, well, a word beginning with F and Cuomo over and over again. So there was a kind of intra-Democrat bitterness about this, which shows you why it's really quite a different race than, what we might be talking about in the midterms in 2026 or the next presidential election. This was a civil war within the Democratic Party to a certain extent, and one that, Mamdani and his left-wing ideas have triumphed on tonight.
I mean, that puts me in mind, in a way. I mean, again, completely different circumstances and candidates and all the rest of it. You think of how Trump came to power in the Republicans. And you think of those early debates where he said, he criticized the Iraq War. Well, didn't just criticize it, said that it had been lied about, and kind of made the Republican Party feel incredibly uncomfortable about itself and having to defend its recent record. And then you've got exactly what you've just described, Sarah. You've got this guy, Andrew Cuomo, who was popular. I'd forgotten actually how popular he had been, and you're right to remind us, but actually certainly isn't now, and just has everything about him that you can hang on the old guard, including disreputable behavior, to put it mildly. And that sense of someone who is able to run against the party, it just seems to me this time round is incredibly important. And when I say this time round, I mean this time round in the round, not just in this election, not just in the midterms, next time round, where you're going to see one or two people emerging who are spiky, kind of anti-party figures, but also crucially in the next presidential election, where it just seems to a growing number of people, I think, that the policies in a way don't matter, being left, being on the right of the party, whatever. What matters is the ability to communicate to people a sense of a complete change from the past. And that, Mariana, is what he has done, which Cuomo obviously couldn't.
Yeah, and I think that that's something we chatted about it so much exactly a year ago when we were talking about Donald Trump's victory in the election. It's the presidential election. This ability to make people feel like you're against the political establishment, even if you are very much a part of it or from it or everything else, that you don't just sort of do as told and as is expected. And I think one of the things that the Democrats have struggled with from a perception point of view, not just on social media, but beyond that, is this idea that they are very much the sort of political elite. They are the establishment. And Donald Trump and his the various politicians around him have succeeded in really painting that narrative of those politicians. And so that's why someone like Mamdani is so effective, because he kind of turns around and, again, with the caveat of in a very unique place where he, his success would, as Sarah says, probably feel quite different in different places. But nonetheless, he does kind of say to them, look, actually, unless you turn around and say, we're going to do it differently, the outcome is probably not going to feel different. And we've chatted about people like Gavin Newsom, for example, who's been testing out different, the Californian governor, Democrat, who's been testing out different social media strategies and trying to sort of play Trump at his own game and writing all these tweets in capitals and everything else. But even clips of him I saw yesterday were people saying, look, this guy is such a politician, like he's in a suit and he's smooth and he's talking in this certain way. Whereas someone like Mamdani, although he does wear a suit, so does Trump, etc., but they just managed to do that. And it seems like you either sort of are able to separate yourself from what, and this is all about people feeling disillusioned with politics and politicians, isn't it? They just feel like a lot of people, and you look at all kinds of polling that suggests lots of people just feel incredibly let down by politicians. And so you basically need to seem not like a politician.
Well, on that subject, what's he going to do, Sarah?
Well, he's now going to have a bit of a battle. And this is going to be really fascinating, isn't it, to see whether Democrats actually want to try and harness the movement that he's put together, or whether they're in opposition to it. Chuck Schumer, leading Democrat in the Senate, one of the most important voices in the Democratic Party, who also happens to be a New York senator himself, of course. He went and cast his vote this morning and wouldn't say who he'd voted for. All he said was, I voted and I look forward to working with the next mayor of New York. He wouldn't say whether it was Cuomo or Mamdani that he had voted for. So, it was very obvious this morning that Mamdani was going to have a big victory. And even then, Chuck Schumer couldn't throw his weight behind him. So what we're going to go into now is this mayor-elect has got to raise the money to try to pay for the promises that he's made of universal free childcare, free bus travel, some of the other things that he's promised New Yorkers. He doesn't have the power to raise income taxes or corporate taxes to pay for that. That's the Democratic governor of New York who would have to do that, Kathy Hochul. She has said during the campaign that's not something she intends to do. So you're going to have a bit more of a blue-on-blue battle, a civil war within the Democrats over whether or not he's going to be able to get the funding to deliver his promises. So, you know, the battle inside the Democratic Party, I think, is going to go on for some time, because for all that, you know, we can say, look, this is a model for how to succeed as a Democrat in the Trump age, don't forget that Republicans have seized on this already to say this radical, dangerous left-winger Mamdani, this is what the Democrats are really about. Finally, we've seen their true colours now that this guy's been campaigning, and they're going to try and paint the whole party nationwide as being as radical as Mamdani is. So lots and lots of establishment figures are not going to want to fall in behind him and give him what he wants and adhere to his left-wing agenda. They're probably going to be battling him for months or years to come.